coworkers whose names are in the book of life. This phrase, clement, means merciful or mild. He could be a representative name. Synecdoche, it means someone who speaks or discourses, but that is, we really think those are just the people's names. And that phrase at the end, the book of life, is found only 8 times in the Bible, and they're all in the New Testament. And only one is written here in Paul. Where are the rest of them? Revelation. Yeah, the rest of them are in Revelation. And the remaining 7 are in Revelation. And the phrase may come from an ancient custom of keeping genealogical records in a book. You can see that in Nehemiah. And anyone whose name was not found in the book of life was thrown into the lake of fire. In, I think it's Revelation 20:15. So you want your name to be written in the book of life because of your trust and belief in God. So that's really kind of the setup for these verses. And I said anxiety is a Greek word to be of 2 minds, and anxious comes from to squeeze, to choke. Isn't that interesting that anxiety squeezes and chokes us? It chokes out the things that are good. It chokes out the things we should be listened to. And anxiety chokes out thankfulness. And so I think it's an interesting word as we think about anxiety. Last week, I was talking more, as Van said, about, getting rid of the guilt and shame of what lies behind. And anxiety is more about borrowing from the future and not really being able to enjoy the present because we're worried about what's coming. So in the face of division, Paul kind of goes at this thing directly. He names the women. He names the people who are fighting. He admits that there's some sort of disagreement and calls them to agree in the Lord. And I think that's a good model for churches today, is that you've got to name the disagreement. You've got to name that there are struggles. You got to name that there are differences and admit that there's a problem, but then try to say, how can we hold this together under the lordship of Christ? How can we hold things together even though we disagree? And you figured out how to do that in your own families. You're going to have to figure, maybe you need to do this for Thanksgiving. Maybe you just, have a letter to read when people get to your house for Thanksgiving. And, I urge you, Tony, and, whoever you want to read, to get along, whoever it might be, Mary, whoever, just read that, Jackie, just read that out loud, or maybe it's your name that's in there. So that you can get ahead of the struggles that your families might have for Thanksgiving. I already know what the issues are going to be in our family. It just happens every year. And I just know what we're, I can talk to you about that afterwards. But this is on tape, I can't say all the things that need to be said. But there is an appeal to meet where we do stand together, to take what we do have in common, not to let our differences be the things that that push us apart. I remember one Thanksgiving, we were down in Kiln, Mississippi. And while we were down in Kiln, Mississippi, my kids started into a fight about the ethical nature of zoos. And this became a huge family row about how ethical zoos were. And I may have children in my family who like just to bait the bear. They just come to the table and and they want to see just exactly what debate the family could have. And so I think I was sleeping when I heard the conversation about the ethical nature of zoos. So if you want to throw something into your Thanksgiving discussion, maybe you can throw in the ethical nature of zoos. But where do we stand together? Can we appeal to our common our bond in Christ? And the great thing is that Paul doesn't really scold them from a distance. He doesn't threaten them from a distance, but he doesn't gloss over their conflict in a sort of a vague and indirect way. because people would have known the issues. I mean, in your Sunday school, in your church, in your family, you know what the issues are. So he doesn't name the issues in the letter so they're like perpetually there in stone. He alludes to them, and he doesn't want them to get mired in conflict or mired in gossip. And what Dietrich Bonhoeffer says is that once we have a relationship with Christ, all of our relationships are mediated by Christ in our lives, or they at least should be. So Christ is able to mediate our relationship with other people. So when I am in conflict with someone, my conflict is not just between the two of us, but that Jesus is there to intercede between us. And often we forget that. We think we're just having a conflict with another person. And what Bonhoeffer said is that Christ is there in our midst, and Christ goes before us, and we should allow Christ to go before us in those conflicts. But often, instead of allowing Christ to mediate that, we jump in full bore ourselves. And now we get to Philippians 4. This is the text for Sunday. And it's a wonderful text. You can realize why it's the text chosen for Thanksgiving Day. And it says, rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I will say, rejoice. You know, he wants to make sure that he's clear about this. Let your gentleness be known to everyone. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything. I was talking to my wife this morning, and she didn't sleep last night. And I said, you know, are you worried about something? And she's like, well, I can't really put my finger on exactly what I'm worried about. And then I started giving her a list of things she could worry about. And then she's like, well, now I'm going to be worried about worrying. You know, I'm anxious about anxiety. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. So let's walk through that. He is in prison. He is in the midst of difficulty. And yet he is telling his people in the midst of their difficulty, friends, it's not that bad. You need to rejoice. You need to find a deep sense of joy, even in the midst of suffering. And he says it a couple times. Let me be clear. Rejoice, rejoice, rejoice. And then he's saying, rejoice despite your circumstances. You know, you despite your circumstances. Go ahead, two clicks for me there, Nathan. One more. Despite your circumstances, you're in conflict with someone, rejoice. You're in prison, rejoice. You're in church, rejoice. You're in trouble, rejoice. You're in the rough, whether it's, you know, in life, or you're in the rough of life, or you rejoice. I challenge you to whatever circumstance you're in today, might you be able to rejoice? Can you rejoice in all circumstance, despite your circumstance? Because your joy does not come from your circumstance. And then we turn to the next slide, and I just want you to just look at your neighbor and tell them, let your gentleness be known to everyone. Are you known for your gentleness? Paul is trying to say to us to be known for our gentleness. Let your gentleness be known to everyone. Be gentlemen, if you will. Let your gentleness be known to everyone. And why should we be gentle? And the reason we should be gentle, Paul is saying, is because the Lord is near. And some would say that's an allusion to the end time. So if things are about to end, if they're about to come to a conclusion, you should be gentle, because life is too short not to be gentle. And if the Lord is coming back, you should be gentle. But there's also the sense that God is with you, that the Lord is with you, that the Lord is ever present. And if the Lord is ever present, that gentleness of the Lord should come through you. Why should we be gentle? Because the Lord is near. And then he says, do not be anxious. This is the hardest one, I think. Do not be anxious. We are an incredibly anxious society. And if you look at the studies, the anxiety levels are rising and rising and rising. There's a woman I probably told you about before, Jean Twin. She's got a wonderful TED talk about anxiety, and she traces it all to the introduction of the iPhone. And she's a researcher at the University of San Diego, and she talks about teen suicide rates. She talks about anxiety, especially in teenage girls, if anybody has one or has had to deal with one, and talks about how the advent of the iPhone has been what has contributed to that. And it's a difficult thing because it makes me feel like that thought, don't think about red elephants. Think about anything you want, but don't think about red elephants. Got it? You Alabama fans, don't think about red elephants. Think about anything else. And what do you think about? Red elephants, right? I mean, it's hard to get them out of your head. And now Paul says, do not be anxious. And what does that do? That's to ramp up people's anxiety level. I wasn't anxious before, but now I'm a little bit anxious. Do not be anxious about anything. But then he tries to give us a solution to deal with our anxiety. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, turning whatever you have over to God, pleading in supplication for God's help, with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God. And too often, people don't let their requests be known to God. They keep their stuff inside and they don't ask for help. And what Paul is trying to say is, in the midst of anxious and difficult times, bring God in, ask God for help, for the Lord is near. So why do you think people are so anxious today? The phone, yeah, Pat. Yep. There's so much news out there, and a lot of it bad. So it's the amount that you.
It's not even news. It's the amount of the email and how much that's supposed to make us more productive.
Yeah, email is someone else's to-do list sent to you.
We have stuff we don't need.
Stuff we don't need, okay, that we have to take care of and maintain. A lot of baggage. Okay, success drives some of that. And I often talk about living into fruitfulness and not success, which kind of combines faithfulness and success, fruitfulness. Other thoughts? Expectations, Mark, you lost your brother right about a year ago, right? And, loss puts things into perspective, doesn't it? It's painful, and sometimes it helps us to know what is most important and what isn't. What isn't. Other thoughts on why people are so anxious? Not you personally, but why other people are so anxious.
I used to train people to look for things in contrast.
Okay.
So I created
Yeah. Right. If your job is to create, to look for things that could possibly go wrong, it creates anxiety. My wife sometimes says to me, I should be an insurance underwriter because I can think through all the possible scenarios of the things that could go wrong. But let's take a survey here. Who makes decisions and worries about them afterwards? Who worries about them enough beforehand not to worry about them afterwards? Okay. Yeah, my wife is one of those people that worries enough beforehand that when she's made a decision, she's cool. I make a quick decision and then I'm like, that's called anxiety, Phil. That's called anxiety. And then what he says is that if you will do that, if you offer these things to God and not try to have them by yourself, the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. And I don't think I've ever thought of it until this time through, is that when he's writing that with a guard over him. Think about that. He's got a prison guard over him, and he's writing to people, guard your heart, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. He's able to take his circumstance, his imprisonment, and use that as a metaphor or a parable for how we should guard our own hearts and minds, someone who's being guarded. So I just had never really thought about that before, but that word guard jumped out this time. Guard your hearts and minds. Imagine a guard standing over Paul as he writes. And then the word jumps out, and the word is forever, whatever. Some of you are going to have a whatever Thanksgiving. You have teenagers at home, and you're going to be asking them what they want to do, and they'll say, whatever. What do you want for lunch? Whatever. And Paul wants us to have a whatever Thanksgiving. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is, get there, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is, if there is any excellence and if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. How many minutes a day do you spend thinking about these things? Thinking about that which is honorable, true, just, pure, pleasing, and commendable.
So if you get the thing tell you the hours.
Oh, yeah,
That's right.
it is. It is. How many hours you spend on Facebook? How many? Yeah, it tells you how many hours you spend in prayer.
That was lacking.
Okay. Yeah, well, maybe you need to put.
But I think, don't think a lot of this.
Oh, certainly.
Yeah, stuff like it.
Right. And-
sometimes we're trying to get it back. Whatever.
Right.
It brings you back to the hour.
Sure. Pat?
Focus here started out as Thanksgiving. In the middle of this thing, it's my favorite tradition with Thanksgiving.
Yep.
Because of the most important words. of the whole
Yep.
first section.
Yep.
Because when you do that, everything changes.
Exactly. Yes. Thanksgiving can crowd out anxiety. But if you're full of anxiety, it's hard to have Thanksgiving. But if you're full of Thanksgiving, it can crowd out anxiousness. And even Thanksgiving for the smallest thing. We were in Disciple yesterday, and I'll probably use it in my sermon. We were talking, and you know how those discussions in a Bible study you kind of start having. And one of the young women said, "How do you give thanks in everything?" And and the other woman said, "The only way I can think of it is you have to give thanks whatever happens. You have to give thanks no matter what happens." Because I told her, I said, Christians have the audacity to give thanks in advance. Even before we know the outcome, we are willing to give thanks in advance because we know what the larger outcome is. And she said, well, the only way you could give thanks like that is no matter what comes down the pike, you give thanks. But in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, offer your petitions to God. Ask God for what is needed. As for the things that you've learned and received and heard and noticed in me, do them, and the God of peace will be with you. This is really the rabbinical model where you are following in the dust of your rabbi. And Paul is teaching them like a rabbi. He's asking them to follow in his footsteps. And if they'll follow in his footsteps, and do what they saw him do and what they heard him do and what they noticed in him do. If you'll do those, the God of peace will be with you. So I love that. There's the peace of God from the God of peace. And these are the things, these virtues are the things that we should think about. Think about things that are true, honorable, just, pure, pleasing, and commendable. Some of you picked up a gratitude journal, and maybe these are things you need to look for in the days ahead. What are things that are true, just, honorable, pure, and pleasing? And Paul says, imitate me. Imitate me. Do what you saw me do among you, and the peace of God will come from the God of peace. So I've got a couple questions for you to think about. One is just, what is your favorite Thanksgiving tradition? At our house, it isn't Thanksgiving without. What are you known for? Are you known for your gentleness? And another translation of that word gentleness in the Greek is moderation. You know, good Methodists are known for their moderation. Are you known for your moderation? Are you known for your gentleness? If you were to ask colleagues at work, if you were to ask family members, what are you known for? Would gentleness be among those qualities? How do you let your requests be known to God? What is your discipline? What is your ritual? What do you think most about each day and why? How can we be more peaceful, trusting that the Lord is near? And how do you practice gratitude? Got it? And you have 26 minutes.